This is the Rich Life podcast, and we are going to be talking today about midlife crises or quarter life crises, but I guess points in your life when you're taking a step back and also maybe looking a little bit forward. I'll tell you what, Paul, maybe I'm going through this a little bit. I'm like 40 now. People think I look like 27, but I'm actually almost 40. Every decade they go down, and when you're 30s, you learn something. And I'm pretty optimistic what I'm going to learn in my 40s. I don't know what it is. You put together an outline for today's pod on the midlife crisis. So I'm excited to hear what you got to say about this one.
Yeah, I think it's a good topic to talk about. I think a lot of our listeners are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and my clients figured this would be a pretty apt topic to talk about and pretty relatable, even if you don't ascribe to the notion of quote unquote crisis. But I think there's a lot of good teaching points to talk about.
Have you, maybe for the audience, how old are you? And then have you gone through one of these yet? Or I don't know what they call it. 1/3
Yeah. So I'm
crisis.
43, going on 44 at the time of this podcast. And yeah, I would say that I wouldn't necessarily use the word crisis because there's a negative connotation to it. But as I was putting this topic together, yes, definitely have been through this scenario probably a number of times. Yeah. And I think as we'll talk about, I'm looking forward to more, hopefully.
Yeah. And I always wonder what triggers it. Is it just simply an age, a round number on age, or is it like when your kids become 9, 10, 11, or is it some external trigger? Or why does it happen, I guess?
I think there's a lot of different causes, but when I researched this topic, I think a couple of common causes came up. One of the big ones is this notion of like social conditioning, right? So folks, they spend their lives adhering to certain expectations, and then that in turn can suppress your personal ambitions or desires. This can happen to men or women. Statistically, if you take a poll, I think men are more likely to say that they're going through the quote unquote midlife crisis. This could definitely happen to either men or women. So for example, if that person really strongly ties their identity to, let's say, the provider role, right? Someone really embraces that role, that identity as the provider for the family. Up until that point, they might have put aside certain aspirations, certain dreams to do something more practical, right? And then they get to a certain age and they realize, oh my gosh, is this all there is to life? Right? Is there something more? Like, what have I given up all these years? Right?
The narratives, right? Like people, we give narratives to everything, good
Correct.
and bad.
But it could also be, for example, like a mother who really embraces the caretaker role for all these years, right? Like the matriarch of the family or the primary caretaker. But if you're lucky, the kids will grow up and they will leave the nest, right? And then that's also another common scenario is what happens once you get the empty nest syndrome, right? All of a sudden, this identity that you've had for all these years, it's come up against the reality that your kids are out of the house, they're all grown up, right? What then? Those are like pretty common examples. Another one is the sheer fact that we all get older.
Someone dies, or like somebody dies close to you, or you get sick, or get a colonoscopy or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I know for myself, it's scary. We know people who are no longer with us, or we're starting to see people in our age group start to develop things like cancer or illnesses through no fault of their own, right? These are relatively healthy people who they just got bad luck. Right? They didn't, not like they were living unhealthy lives, but yeah, terrible luck with their health. And then that makes you think, oh, geez, how much time do I have left in the world? Is it guaranteed that I'll even be here for the next year, let alone 5 or 10? So yeah, I think just the awareness of one's mortality, that's also a very common cause for someone to reflect on their life and wonder all there is to life. Not only is it just about witnessing other deaths or other people have health problems, but it's also changes in our own bodies, right? So like women will go through menopause at a certain age. Men will go through something similar. Testosterone levels will decrease year by year. That leads to changes in our bodies and sleep and all sorts of things. We start to realize our own mortality and that we're no longer as young as we used to be. It makes us really think about what else is there.
Yeah. So on your website, you have a lot of these examples, and obviously you change the names of these people, but some of these are pretty typical. Maybe you can just describe some of these people so people have a context, and then what does that all mean? Positive outcome or whatnot.
The term crisis, when they say like midlife crisis, so that can mean a lot of different things to people. So I personally, I'm not a huge fan of that word. And I think when you use that word, it's actually it actually makes it under recognized. So I think statistically, like around 15 to 20% of people say they actually have gone through like a midlife crisis. But I think that's actually like severely underreported. I think there's a lot more cases of mini crisis or like inflection points in our life that cause us to reevaluate the path that we're on. I put down some like positive outcomes and then some cautionary tales. So the stereotypical case of a midlife crisis is like the dude in his 40s, right? He goes out and buys a boat or a race car. Right?
Super fast car.
Yes. And maybe go find a mistress or destroys his marriage. So because I think that's the stereotypical image that people conjure up when we talk about midlife crisis, that actually results in this being underreported, right? Because there's this negative connotation to the term. When in fact, I think a lot of us will go through something like this in our lives in one way or another. One example that I have here is this guy, we'll call him Michael, right? He's a corporate executive. His background is that all these years, he was a hard worker. He worked in the corporate world as an executive, had great drive in his work and climbed the corporate ladder and got to somewhere pretty high in the ranks. He's married, 2 kids, and he's always been the provider for the family, always prioritized like, success and financial security for his family. Right? His wife was a homemaker, and because of his financial success, he was able to really take care of his family, give everyone a very comfortable life. Kids got to go to nice private schools, right? As he got older, he started feeling disconnected, dissatisfied. The inflection point came when a close friend of his from college suddenly passed away. That was very upsetting to him, and it really shook him deeply and made him question his own life choices, wondering, gosh, if this could happen to my best friend, could this happen to me? As he questions his mortality, he starts thinking about in life that he made versus the ones that he didn't make, like the things that he gave up in his quest for something very practical, right? Very, very financial, like financially driven. So starts daydreaming about it's like lifelong dream of traveling the world. He wishes back when he was younger that he got to actually backpack through different countries, or he has this idea of starting his own vineyard one day. There's all these things that he's put off because he was a very practical person, and he really embraced that role of the provider for the family. After going through this tough period for a while, you're talking with a spouse, so he actually ended up seeking out my help, and I'm going to say this is a positive outcome because
that's why people do it, right? Sometimes, depending on your spouses, if you have one of those relationships where they just give you a hard time, being vulnerable around that. I guess we'll save that for the next relationship podcast. It's the thing about just getting it off your chest, right? Like it's important, whether you have any resolution or not.
I think you touched on a key point is that a lot of it really depends on the partner in these instances, right? Because that can really make or break the way that this thing goes. So if you have a partner that is really like judgmental, like not very receptive, sometimes you're in a situation where the partner could have easily gone the other way and be like, what are you doing? Like, you're the main breadwinner. What the heck are you thinking? That could have easily gone that way, especially if she and the rest of the family are direct beneficiaries of his financial success, which benefits everyone. So if he's got dreams of leaving this, then that impacts everyone. And fortunately, he had a very supportive, understanding wife. And I think that it was absolutely very crucial and a very big helping piece to this.
A lot of strong guys have, out of necessity, very strong spouses, right? I think. So
Right.
they may become hardened over time.
But in terms of practical advice, it's hard to, nothing's ever black and white, right? It's not like you should just turn off the lights and say goodbye to your job. What he ended up doing is he steps to delegate things at work so that he could actually free up his time, right? So thereby gradually reducing his workload so instead of quitting all of a sudden. So gradually free up your time by delegating more tasks and how to build up avenues of passive income. This is where the practical aspect is also, this is like, what do you do a good job of in your wealth elevator community to get folks off of that hamster wheel, start developing other sources of income, because a lot of folks still want to have the money coming in, but also be able to do the things that you want to do in life. And it's really important to blend the practical aspect, but also give permission to start dreaming, start to map out and draw out what you envision on your brand new canvas. And I think it is possible to do that if you combine the practical with the imaginative and creative aspect of how you want your life to be.
The theme is time is more valuable than money at a certain point. The older you get, certain life events accelerate things. The pandemic, for example, all this staying at home, not getting cooties from anybody else, really accelerate the fact that ain't nobody want to go into office. They want to stay at home some of these days, and nobody wants to go pick up their groceries from Target. They just want to have the person throw it in their car or take out. Like certain things accelerate certain trends that should have happened a long freaking time ago.
Yeah.
And maybe midlife crises are like, they're just recheck points of what are those things. And for everybody listening, time is ever so slightly becoming more and more valuable than the money that you're trying to penny pinch away. So that's very common, right? That theme.
Yeah, correct. And then speaking from my own personal experience with my wife, it was during the period leading up to the pandemic and then also during the pandemic when a similar quote unquote crisis took place. For folks who don't know, around that time, my wife and I both had successful medical practices. Like everything on the surface was coming along. We had 2 young kids. Things were getting done. Everything was operating like clockwork, right? We both had busy careers, successful at our practices. Like everything was going great, except the most important relationship of all, which was our marriage, right? We realized that through all the quote unquote success, we had actually inadvertently let our own relationship suffer due to neglect.
And did that get exacerbated by the pandemic because you just had more hours with each other and less separation than before? So it's just pulling more mileage on the car.
Absolutely. Yeah. So things got extra stressed during the pandemic, right? More time together.
I used to work construction and like these we're all on the road, right? They would only see their spouses they drive home 10 hours and kiss their spouse and kid for 4 hours, take a shower, get a receipt so they can write off their expenses and get their ass back. And I was like, some of these guys are just crazy, I thought. But I was like, that's why they stay married, because they only see their spouse for 4 hours.
Yeah.
If they're sleeping, they don't sleep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then meanwhile, our kids that are at home trying to do like classes on Zoom, we're trying to see patients via telemedicine. My wife's got extra stress at work because at that time they were short on masks. So literally she would get 1 mask a week. And this is at like a major New York City hospital. So a lot of stress coming from different directions. So just eventually it was a straw that broke the camel's back. Long story short.
From my point of view, it sounds like a lot of fun. Good thing that wasn't my situation, but I think it all worked out well. That's the growth mindset, is you throw a bunch of obstacles your guys' way and you guys pulled through. But in a way, it'd be good in the end. Not everybody sees it when you're in it like that.
Correct. And I think that's like a huge key to this like midlife crisis is like, what's your mindset? Like, how do you see it? Do you see it as actually a crisis or do you see it more as an opportunity? And if you see it more as an opportunity, if you have a growth mindset, then that's a fantastic thing because it can lead to something much better.
Little do I know, but I've started to realize more times than not, they're going to some type of crisis in their life. Sometimes really big, sometimes huge, and maybe not like a health scare, but like certainly it strikes their financial wherewithal to kind of book a call with me. And what I realized is maybe about a third of the people take this wave of emotion and uncomfortableness and they do something about it proactively. The other 2/3, I don't know if they do or to some lesser degree, or most likely they don't do anything, but they don't ride this wave of momentum and do anything about it. But I think what's so amazing about the human psyche is we get so used to things, right? People get used to in jail or in like horrible living conditions, or heck, you read that book about the Holocaust, right? People got used to that. That's horrible. But we get used to things and then we don't make any necessary changes. For all we know, you and your spouse could have just gotten used to that status quo and rode it out another 20 years and things would have been shitty. When you're in it, and a midlife crisis or quarter life crisis, whatever you want to call it, is that mini wave that I think happens every few years to everybody.
Exactly. That's why these, like, whatever you call it, mini life crises, I think they're far more common than just a one-off thing that happens to 15 to 20% of the population. So I think it can happen every few years. And if you have that growth and opportunity mindset, that's actually really good because That means you're constantly evolving, constantly growing. You're looking at your current situation, figuring out like what could be better, what could be improved, like how can certain things be optimized? How can my financial situation be better? How can my health, how can my relationships be better? And it's a good thing to take stock every once in a while and to not be satisfied with the status quo.
Yeah. To take that wave, maybe poke some fun at it now. I think a lot of us here maybe have been dumped before. The few months after that, after you've taken yourself off the ground, it's like a Rocky movie. You're like
Yeah.
working out, like new style, you're writing the great American novel or
Yeah.
starting a new podcast, right? That's when you take that momentum and you do something positive with it. And then you start to look forward to being dumped or something else
Yeah.
happened. I guess you never want bad things to happen, but you recognize that, hey, you're in this state of regeneration. And then how can you ride this wave, this up momentum?
Exactly. Momentum is key. And then also, I think the more this happens to you, that builds resiliency, right? Because each time a crisis happens, you end up better and stronger because of it. And then the more experience you have like that, the next time the challenge or crisis arises, you've been through something similar, right? Perhaps not the same exact challenge or crisis, but if you have this experience of like, overcoming that and building up resiliency, you almost look forward to the next challenge and to the next crisis, which is an opportunity.
Yeah, but that's not everybody here. And maybe some people are still doubting this. But
Mhm.
why don't you give me an example, Paul, right? So you got a lot of like examples where you worked with people in the past, guiding them through these situations. Like maybe give us a little bit like how you guided them through these types of things. And maybe we don't want to say who they are, obviously, but like maybe guide us because it might trigger somebody out there to be like, that's my situation. And
Mhm.
maybe vicariously, by just hearing how a third party like yourself guided that particular person, maybe they might take away something from it.
Yeah, great question. This reminds me of something that I remember hearing from one of your old podcasts, which was to be careful of who you take financial advice from, right? Especially if they haven't achieved financial independence and they're trying to give you financial advice. Think twice about that. I feel like that can also apply to the life coaching realm, right? If you're looking to get advice from somebody or looking for guidance, it's always helpful to seek out somebody who has done something similar or along the same lines of what you're trying to get to. And the people that I work with, I blend the medical background with traditional Chinese medicine, but I also have an interest in the practical financial aspect of how you build up passive streams of income. And I've found that having that practical piece to complement things really helpful, right? So I try to figure out where are you stuck, what's keeping you from living the life of your dreams.
Give us an example, maybe your last case, because I think some people, they don't want to admit something blocking them. Like when I went to Tony Robbins, people said, make sure you go there with a
Yeah.
limiting belief or three things. What is that? I
Yeah.
think that's where some people, we got to break it down a little bit. What was the block for it? What's it?
Yes. So yeah, finding out the limiting beliefs is key, right? Because we all have these, and so listening to someone's language is really important, right? Because you can pick up a lot on their belief system, right? Things that they think that they can and cannot do, right?
Words leads to thoughts, thought leads to actions.
Exactly. Exactly. I'll take a case of an older woman, like in her like late 50s that I work with. She immigrated to the country about 20 years ago, but she was an entrepreneur back in her original country and came to America and worked in a hospital setting. Things got very stressful during COVID, had a lot of health problems because of the stress. Initially, that was what was her biggest complaints, was headaches and insomnia. It seemed like health problems. And she had already seen multiple doctors, therapists even prescribed pills for her symptoms, but because they were just her symptoms, it didn't do much. It turns out she was actually really stressed about how can she retire? How can she go live the life of her dreams? But she didn't, there was that gap. Okay, how do I get from the stressful situation to my dream, which is to live in Costa Rica, right?
Yeah. They had
Yeah.
the money.
So this is where the practical aspect comes in, right? The financial coaching also was an important part because how do we get her debt equity to start working for her? How do we redeploy things? Like how do we focus on like passive cash flow, right? To get her out of the two job, right? So it's a really interesting blend of health, medical wellness, coaching, but also the financial piece. And this is a great story because she started getting into real estate investing, and credit to her, she was willing to take like massive action and she quickly built up a very formidable real estate portfolio and got the cash flow, right? Was able to leave her job much sooner than she ever anticipated. And she made her dream come true. She moved to her dream retirement place. Nice house by the water. Credit to her, like a really inspirational story, how she was able to make that happen. I think for a lot of us, it's way more within reach than we realize. It's just getting the guidance to help identify where is that missing piece? Where is that gap? Oftentimes, it doesn't take as much as you think. It just takes an outside perspective, someone who has done something similar, someone who can see things from a different way. If we all stay in our own heads, we're never going to be able to think our way out of a quandary that is really in our own minds. Yeah.
So as we wrap things up here,
Yeah.
what is one of the most common blocks that people have that they may not think of otherwise?
I think one common one I see a lot of is regret, like regret of missed opportunities in the past. The challenging part is that when you focus on what you didn't do or could have done in the past, that in turn shapes your belief system as that this is who I am, right? Like I'm someone who has let opportunities slip me by, and it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy as you move forward, right? And then that in turn feeds anxiety and fear.
That spiral.
Yeah, because as more time passes, you're thinking, oh my God, here I go again. I'm not doing something that I probably should be doing. Here we go again. Opportunities are going past me. People around me, they're seizing opportunities, but man, like I just keep letting them go. That can lead into this spiral and become part of your belief system. And one of the strongest forces in the universe is to be consistent with who you believe you are. So if deep down you believe that you're someone who isn't able to take that massive action, take those risks, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy unless you somehow can snap out of it or get some help.
I know what I do, but nobody cares what that is, right? Because trained myself to move through the quicksand. Like when a workout's hard and I know I'm not going to complete it in time, I just keep moving through it. How do you walk? Obviously, this spans through multiple sessions, right? You got to give them a little confidence, or what's the strategy? Or is it just walking them by the hand and talking this out?
Yeah.
It's awareness first, right?
It's awareness. Yeah, I think the consistent follow-up is also like a big piece, right? And I think we might have touched upon this on the podcast, but most of us have a lot of negative thoughts in our heads, right? And some of these are limiting beliefs, but let's just call them negative thoughts. This is how our brains are wired.
Yeah.
They're wired for negative thoughts. And the purpose of our brains actually is not to give us happiness and fulfillment. It's actually to keep us safe and away from danger, right? The problem with that is it holds us back from moving forward. To move forward, we actually need not just positive thoughts, but we need a lot more positive thoughts than negative thoughts. Right? Some research suggests that you need anywhere between 3 to 5 positive thoughts for every one negative thought. So that's a lot of positive thoughts that you need to have to even override your old limiting beliefs to move forward. One session, one book probably isn't going to be enough, right? It can get you inspired, it can get you thinking, right? In a new mindset, but our brains are like tough nuts to crack. You really need consistent habits to start to build that momentum and get positive reinforcement as you go along, right? Whether it's working out, developing good health habits, relationships even, it's all very similar. Like you need consistency. You also need momentum. And even if that means to have people in your corner, accountability partners, surrounding yourself with the right people. All that stuff really adds up to make a difference. 1 or 2 sessions, it's helpful, but it's a lot of these things that we're talking about in our podcast to build on that success.
I'll let you have the final word here, Paul. All I got to say for folks is baby steps. Maybe just once this podcast ends, maybe the action item is to sit and ponder what negative soundtracks that are in your head, or just have some awareness and what's maybe your block or what's holding you back. It takes some time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I always like to tell people I work with, what are your dreams? Right? If you had a blank canvas and you could create or draw out an ideal scenario for your life, what would it be? For some people, I've noticed it's actually very hard because they've never given themselves permission to dream, right? They just haven't given themselves permission because it's been a lot about meeting other people's expectations or expectations of what they think should be doing. So I'll say this first step is don't be afraid to daydream. Don't be afraid to dream, even if it seems so outlandish. Give yourself that okay to just let your mind roam wild and start thinking about possibilities. And figure out what will make you happy, what would make your life truly awesome.
That's the podcast this week, guys. If you want to get a hold of Dr. Poe, go to drpoe.com. And if you want to get around other people within our community, go to thewealthelevator.com/club, and we will see you next time. Bye.